Joining us now is Alberto Gonzales, former Attorney General and White House counsel for George W. Bush. He's now the Dean at Belmont University College of Law and the author of True Faith and Allegiance, a story of service and sacrifice in war and peace. Thanks so much for being with us. We've actually had a chance to talk about William Barr already. There have been new revelations since our last discussion. Not only did he write a memo outlining why he did not think an investigation into certain kinds of obstruction of justice was valid, but we've now learned that he shared that memo with the president's lawyers, even holding discussions with Jay Sekulow and the Raskins about this. A discussion about presumably defense strategy, yet now he's sitting in a confirmation hearing to oversee the very investigation in which he discussed a defense strategy. Is there a conflict of interest there?
I don't know if there is a conflict of interest. Obviously, it raises questions, and I'm sure that members of the Senate Judiciary Committee are going to probe into this. It is unusual. It's not something you normally see before an appointment to be Attorney General of the United States. Of course, at the time, there was nothing inappropriate about sharing that kind of information, sharing his own personal views to members of the Trump team. But obviously, it has created some challenges that Mr. Barr will have to navigate in this confirmation hearing.
You said it raises questions. What questions does it raise for you?
Well, the question would be whether or not he has prejudged certain aspects of the Mueller investigation, the validity of the authority and the power, the scope of the investigation, and whether or not it creates an appearance of, a prejudgment, calls into question the impartiality, perhaps, of the person who is overseeing the investigation. So these are all things that obviously are never good in connection with a high-profile investigation of this nature. And so one of the challenges that Bill Barr will have today is to reassure the American public and members of the Senate Judiciary Committee that, in fact, he is impartial, has an open mind, and as he's apparently going to state publicly, pledge that he's going to allow the Mueller investigation to come to its conclusion.
Well, you said one of the questions you have is whether he has prejudged any aspect of the case. By definition, hasn't he prejudged at least one aspect of the case, that the president can't be guilty of obstruction under the guidelines that he laid out?
Well, perhaps. I have not read the memo, but of course, at the time the memo was written, Bill Barr was unaware, I'm sure, of various aspects of the Mueller investigation. He will now be privy to all aspects of the investigation, and that may change the analysis. We just don't know at this juncture.
Last time we spoke, you suggested that William Barr should go through the process with the Attorney General's office, the Justice Department's ethics lawyers, determining whether or not he should recuse himself from this investigation. Do you still believe that to be the case?
I think in a case like this that is such high profile and that has there's so much interest in this case and this investigation, I don't know why he wouldn't do that. Quite frankly, I think it would be reassuring to the American public and to the members of Congress if, in fact, he could say, I took this matter to the career professionals at the Department of Justice, and they have given me the okay. They believe that it is totally appropriate for me to be totally involved in this investigation. Because, again, these rules exist not for the individual. They exist to protect the institution, the Department of Justice. And so for that reason, I hope that he would do that.
Do you think he needs to make that promise as a voter? And you'll be watching this hearing along with the rest of us. As a voter, do you think he needs to make that pledge today in these Senate hearings, that he will go to the ethics lawyers at the Justice Department and he will abide by their recommendation?
I don't know if he needs to make that pledge. I think what he should pledge is that he will have discussions with senior leadership at the department as to whether or not it would be appropriate. It would be necessary for him to do so. At this juncture, he doesn't have all the facts, and without having all those facts, it may not be appropriate to pledge, because at the end of the day, he is also the Attorney General. His responsibility is to oversee all of the work of the department, and you don't want to step aside unless it really is prudent and based upon the recommendation of the career officials at the Department of Justice.
There's some other legal matters I'd love to discuss with you in the limited time we have left. One of the stories that has come out over the last couple days is that President Trump met with Vladimir Putin several times, and in some cases, in one case in particular, he asked for the interpreter to turn over his notes. He confiscated the interpreter's notes when the interpreter was the only other person in the room. You, of course, were White House counsel. Do you think it would be appropriate for Congress to seek those notes or seek to hear from the interpreter, there are two of them in this case, themselves?
I think we need to find out what transpired in those conversations. Obviously, they're very serious separation of powers considerations. From my perspective, we also worry about whether or not does that set a dangerous precedent with respect to future presidents, having conversations either with or without note takers. I have less concerns about obviously, there are no separation of powers issues if we're talking about Bob Mueller, who is within the executive branch trying to get access to those notes. But I think there are serious separation of powers issues, perhaps with respect to Congress wanting to get their hands on those notes.
It's an interesting idea. You think Robert Mueller has a right to go after those notes or the interpreter if he wants?
Well, again, I don't know whether or not how it might relate, and maybe there may be an obvious connection, because we're talking about perhaps conversations with the leader of Russia. But again, because we're talking about an investigator within the executive branch, the same separation of powers considerations would not exist vis-a-vis Congress wanting those notes.
All right, former Attorney General of the United States, Alberto Gonzales, thanks so much, as always, for being with us.
Thanks for having me.
All right, let's bring in CNN.